This 1972 blaxploitation heist film hides bizarre secrets behind its diamond robbery plot. From a preacher wielding laser technology to film prints literally breaking during rare screenings, and a star who changed his name after converting to Islam while hiding an ironic future connection to heart disease awareness. Fact 1. The star had a sacred name change. When audiences first encountered the commanding presence of Cool Breeze's leading man in 1972, they were watching an actor who had undergone a profound spiritual transformation that completely changed his identity. Thalmus Rasulala, the film's charismatic star who played diamond thief Sidney Lord Jones, was born Jack Crowder in Miami, Florida, on November 15, 1939. But by the time he stepped in front of the cameras for this blaxploitation heist film, he had embraced Islam and taken on a name with deep religious significance that most viewers never understood. The transformation from Jack Crowder to Thalmus Rasulala wasn't just a simple stage name change for Hollywood purposes. When Crowder converted to Islam, he carefully chose each part of his new identity to reflect his spiritual beliefs. The first name Thalmus comes from ancient Greek, meaning to bloom, to sprout, or abound, suggesting growth and flourishing. But it's the last name that carries the most profound meaning. Rasulullah is a variation of the Arabic word Rasulullah, which translates to prophet of God or messenger of Allah. This is actually one of the 99 sacred names traditionally ascribed to the Islamic prophet Muhammad himself. Before his conversion and name change, Jack Crowder had already begun building his entertainment career on Broadway, where he appeared in the hit musical Hello, Dolly as part of the all-black cast starring Pearl Bailey and Cab Calloway. He even recorded songs for the show's best-selling RCA Victor cast album under his original name. But when he made the transition to film, he did so as Thalmus Rasulullah, carrying his new spiritual identity into his acting career. His previous film appearance had been a small role in The Out-of-Towners, under the name Jack Crowder, making Cool Breeze essentially his debut under his chosen Islamic name. Fact 2. A preacher packed laser, cutting heat. Among all the unusual characters assembled for Cool Breeze's diamond heist, perhaps none was more bizarre than Reverend Roy Harris, a man of God who moonlighted as a professional safecracker with access to cutting-edge technology. Roger Ebert, the legendary film critic, was so struck by this character's absurdity that he specifically called out the film's eclectic crew in his review, noting how the movie assembled a wealthy businessman, an ex-con, a clothing store owner who runs a bookie joint out of his back room, a hamburger stand operator, and a preacher who just happens to possess a laser beam. The character of Reverend Harris represents one of the most unusual combinations ever put on screen in a heist movie. While most caper films feature specialists with traditional criminal backgrounds, Cool Breeze decided to create a character who spent his Sundays delivering sermons and his weekdays using advanced laser technology to cut through the toughest safes. The film shows Harris as a legitimate minister who leads his congregation in worship, but when Sidney Lord Jones needs someone with the technical skills to break into a heavily secured diamond vault, the good Reverend just happens to have the right equipment for the job. What made this character even more unusual was the timing. In 1972, laser technology was still relatively new and exotic to most moviegoers, making the idea of a preacher wielding such advanced equipment seem almost science fiction. The film never bothers to explain how a man of the cloth came to possess industrial laser cutting tools, leaving audiences to wonder about the Reverend's mysterious past and unconventional skill set. This strange juxtaposition of religious devotion and high-tech criminal expertise created one of blaxploitation cinema's most memorable supporting characters, even though the film treated his dual life as perfectly normal rather than the wild contradiction it actually represented. Fact 3. The film print literally broke mid-screening. Cool Breeze has become such a rare film that during one of its few modern screenings, the physical film print couldn't even make it through the entire movie without falling apart. A moviegoer who attended a special Library of Congress screening left a detailed account of this unusual incident, explaining how the film literally broke in half during the middle of the presentation. Fortunately, a skilled technician was able to repair the damaged print on the spot, allowing the screening to continue, but the incident perfectly illustrated just how few copies of this 1972 blaxploitation film still exist today. The Library of Congress, which serves as America's National Film Archive, occasionally hosts rare screenings of movies that are difficult or impossible to see anywhere else. These presentations often feature films that never made it to home video, streaming platforms, or regular theatrical revival circuits. Cool Breeze falls into this category of forgotten cinema, making the Library of Congress screening a precious opportunity for film enthusiasts to see a piece of movie history that most people will never encounter. The fact that the film print broke during screening wasn't just bad luck, it was a symptom of how neglected this movie has become over the decades. Unlike popular films that get restored and preserved with multiple backup copies, obscure titles like Cool Breeze often survive with only a handful of prints scattered across various archives and collections. These aging film reels become increasingly fragile over time, with the celluloid becoming brittle and prone to snapping under the stress of projection equipment. The moviegoer who witnessed this incident noted their understanding that very few prints of Cool Breeze are available anywhere, making each surviving copy a precious artifact of 70s cinema that could literally fall apart at any moment. Fact 4. Future fugitive director made his cinematography debut. Behind the camera of Cool Breeze was a young cinematographer named Andrew Davis, who was just starting his career in the film industry, but would eventually become one of Hollywood's most successful action directors. Davis made his feature film debut as director of photography on this low-budget blaxploitation heist movie, marking the beginning of a journey that would lead him to direct some of the biggest blockbusters of the 1990s, including The Fugitive starring Harrison Ford, which earned 7 Academy Award nominations including Best Picture. Davis had arrived at Cool Breeze through his connection with legendary cinematographer Haskell Wexler, who had mentored the young Chicago native on the groundbreaking 1969 documentary Medium Cool. Working as assistant cameraman on that influential film gave Davis the experience and connections he needed to move up to cinematographer on his own projects. When producer Gene Corman was putting together the crew for Cool Breeze, he hired Davis to handle the photography, giving the future director his first chance to be in charge of how a movie looked on screen. This early work with Gene Corman proved to be crucial for Davis's development as a filmmaker. He went on to shoot several more low-budget films for Corman, including Hitman and The Slams, both released in 1973. These blaxploitation and exploitation films served as Davis's film school, teaching him how to work quickly with limited resources while still creating compelling visual stories. The skills he learned shooting these gritty urban dramas would later serve him well when he transitioned to directing big-budget action films. By the time Davis made The Fugitive more than 20 years later, he had traveled an incredible distance from his humble beginnings as the cinematographer on a forgotten diamond heist movie. Fact 5. The wrong Corman brother got famous. In one of Hollywood's most ironic twists of fate, the producer behind Cool Breeze was actually the older, more experienced Corman brother who entered the entertainment industry first, yet remains largely unknown, while his younger sibling became a legendary filmmaker. Gene Corman, who produced this 1972 blaxploitation heist film, was born Eugene Harold Corman on September 24, 1927, making him 17 months older than his brother Roger, who would eventually earn the title King of the B-movies and become one of cinema's most famous producers and directors. Gene had already established himself as a successful Hollywood agent at MCA before Roger even started making films, representing major stars like Joan Crawford, Fred MacMurray, Ray Milland, Harry Belafonte, and Richard Conte. When Roger decided to make his first movie, Monster from the Ocean Floor in 1954, it was actually Gene who arranged the distribution deal, using his industry connections to help launch his younger brother's career. The two brothers began collaborating regularly, with Gene producing and Roger directing a series of low-budget films throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s. Despite Gene's head start in the business and his successful career as both an agent and producer, Roger's name became synonymous with independent filmmaking while Gene remained largely in the shadows. Film historians have noted this unfortunate oversight, with one publication commenting that Roger Corman's fame led to the relegation of his producer brother Gene to the shadows of film history, calling it both unfair and unfortunate, since Gene not only played a crucial, often overlooked part in his brother's story, he had a fine career of his own. By the time Gene produced Cool Breeze for MGM, he had already spent decades building the foundation that would support both brothers' careers. Fact 6. Pam Grier's breakout role was 2 minutes. When Cool Breeze hit theaters in 1972, the promotional materials listed Pam Grier as one of the film's co-stars, suggesting audiences would see plenty of the actress, who would soon become the undisputed queen of blaxploitation cinema. However, fans expecting to watch Grier dominate the screen were in for a major disappointment, as her entire performance consists of just one scene broken into 2 brief parts, totaling approximately 2 minutes of screen time. She plays a character named Mona, a prostitute who has an encounter with the main character Sidney Lloyd-Jones, and then quickly disappears from the movie entirely. This incredibly short appearance makes Cool Breeze one of the most misleading entries on Grier's filmography, especially since it's often described as one of her early breakout roles. In reality, her role was so small that one film critic noted how the co-star billing was deceptive, explaining that while Grier was listed as one of 4 co-stars, she actually had far less screen time than the billing suggested. The critic pointed out that among those 4 co-stars, only Sam Laws as Stretch Finian had a real substantial part in the film, while the other 3 co-stars, who were all women including Grier, had very limited roles. During her brief appearance, Grier's character is shown in 2 segments of the same encounter. The first half takes place in dim lighting, though she's still instantly recognizable due to her distinctive features and commanding screen presence. The second half is better lit, but she exits the scene quickly, leaving audiences wanting much more. At this point in her career, Grier was still building her reputation through small roles in Roger Corman's women in prison films shot in the Philippines, and this tiny part in Cool Breeze was just another stepping stone before she would explode into stardom with Coffee the following year. Fact 7. It's actually the Asphalt Jungle's 4th life. Cool Breeze wasn't an original story at all, but rather the 4th time that Hollywood had adapted the same source material for the big screen. The film was based on W.R. Burnett's 1949 novel The Asphalt Jungle, which had already been transformed into 3 previous movies before director Barry Pollock decided to give it a blaxploitation makeover in 1972. This makes Cool Breeze part of a fascinating chain of adaptations that shows how the same basic heist story could be reinvented for different audiences and genres across more than 2 decades. The original adaptation became a classic film noir when director John Huston brought The Asphalt Jungle to the screen in 1950, starring Sterling Hayden and Louis Calhern. Huston's version followed Burnett's novel closely and ended with all the thieves either dead or in jail, establishing the template for countless heist films that followed. 8 years later, director Delmer Daves took the same story in a completely different direction with The Badlanders in 1958, reimagining the urban crime tale as a Western adventure. Then in 1963, director Wolf Rilla moved the action to Egypt for his version called Cairo, turning the American criminal underworld into an exotic Middle Eastern thriller. Interestingly, the novel had also been adapted for television as a series that ran on ABC from 1961 to 1962, also called The Asphalt Jungle, and starring Jack Warden. By the time Cool Breeze arrived in theaters, audiences were seeing the 5th overall adaptation of Burnett's story, though most viewers had no idea they were watching a tale that had been told so many times before. The film's opening credits acknowledge that it's based on a novel by W.R. Burnett, but strangely never mention which specific book, leaving audiences unaware of the story's rich cinematic history. Fact 8. The American Zoetrope studio switcheroo. Cool Breeze was originally supposed to be filmed at one of the most prestigious independent studios in American cinema, but the production underwent a major location change that left only a tiny fragment of the original plan intact. In November 1971, Hollywood Reporter announced that New World Pictures would shoot the entire film on location in San Francisco and at the American Zoetrope Studio, the groundbreaking facility founded by Francis Ford Coppola that was revolutionizing independent filmmaking. However, by the time cameras actually started rolling, the production had quietly moved almost everything to Los Angeles, with only the opening title sequence actually filmed in San Francisco as originally planned. American Zoetrope represented the cutting edge of independent cinema in the early 1970s, serving as Coppola's base of operations for creating films outside the traditional Hollywood studio system. The facility was equipped with state-of-the-art editing and post-production equipment, and being associated with Zoetrope would have given Cool Breeze significant prestige within the film industry. The studio was already becoming famous as the birthplace of innovative movies that challenged conventional filmmaking approaches, making it an exciting potential home for a blaxploitation remake of a classic heist story. The reasons for this dramatic change in filming locations were never publicly explained, but the shift from San Francisco to Los Angeles represented a move from independent filmmaking back toward more traditional Hollywood production methods. Instead of the single Zoetrope location, the Los Angeles shoot utilized 35 different locations throughout the city, as noted by the Los Angeles Times in their review of the film. This change meant that Cool Breeze lost its connection to one of the most important independent studios of the era, though the brief San Francisco title sequence serves as the only remaining evidence of the film's original ambitious production plans. Fact 9. An AFI student film with MGM money. Cool Breeze represents one of the most unusual collaborations in Hollywood history, as it was essentially a student film project that somehow secured major studio backing from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Director Barry Pollock was making his debut behind the camera after graduating from the American Film Institute, the prestigious film school that had only been founded a few years earlier in 1967. What made this project even more extraordinary was that Pollock didn't just bring his own inexperience to the production, but according to Hollywood Reporter, he filled most of the crew positions with young AFI students who were also just starting their careers in the film industry. The American Film Institute was created specifically to train the next generation of American filmmakers, providing hands-on education in all aspects of movie production, from directing and cinematography to editing and sound design. For a major studio like MGM to entrust a full theatrical release to a crew of film school graduates was almost unheard of in the early 1970s, when the industry was still dominated by experienced professionals who had worked their way up through the traditional studio system over many years. This unusual arrangement meant that Cool Breeze became a real-world classroom for its young crew members, giving them the chance to learn filmmaking while actually making a movie that would be distributed to theaters across the country. The $300,000 budget that producer Gene Corman secured from MGM was modest by studio standards, but it provided these AFI students with far more resources than they would typically have access to in a normal school project. The film essentially served as an expensive film school exercise, with MGM taking a gamble on fresh talent rather than hiring seasoned professionals, creating a unique experiment in bringing academic film education directly into commercial Hollywood production. Fact 10. Roger Ebert used dialogue as evidence. When legendary film critic Roger Ebert reviewed Cool Breeze for the Chicago Sun-Times in March 1972, he demonstrated his famous attention to detail by actually counting how many times certain phrases appeared in the movie's dialogue. Ebert noted that writer-director Barry Pollock seemed unable to get it all together, and then used this observation to make a pointed joke about the script itself, writing that the phrase, "get it all together," turned up in the dialogue maybe 9 times, even edging out "doing my thing" for the title of most overused line in the film. This unusually specific criticism revealed Ebert's sharp ear for dialogue and his willingness to support his reviews with concrete evidence rather than just general impressions. Most film critics would simply say that a movie's dialogue felt repetitive or unoriginal, but Ebert went the extra step of keeping track of exactly how many times the screenwriter relied on the same tired expressions. His comment suggests that he was genuinely bothered by the lazy writing, enough to pay close attention to the repetitive patterns while watching the film in the theater. The fact that both Get It All Together and Doing My Thing appeared so frequently in Cool Breeze reflects the movie's attempt to capture the slang and street language of early 1970s urban culture. However, Pollack's heavy reliance on these particular phrases backfired, making the dialogue sound forced and artificial rather than authentic. Ebert's mathematical approach to criticizing the script showed how a skilled reviewer could use specific details to illustrate broader problems with a film's writing. His observation that these phrases appeared nearly 10 times each suggests that Pollack was either trying too hard to sound hip and contemporary or simply didn't have enough confidence in his own voice as a screenwriter to create more varied and natural-sounding dialogue for his characters. Fact 11. The ironic heart disease connection. One of the most tragically ironic stories in Cool Breeze's history involves its star, Thalmus Rasulala, who died of a heart attack on October 9, 1991, just 2 days before comedian Red Fox also died of the same cause. What makes this timing so eerie is that Rasulala had appeared multiple times on Fox's hit television show, Sanford and Son, in a role that was specifically focused on heart disease prevention. In the 1974 episode titled Fred's Cheating Heart, Rasulala played a character known as the Heart Fund Man, whose job was to educate African Americans about the dangers of heart disease and promote awareness about cardiovascular health in the Black community. During his appearance on the show, Rasulala's character delivered serious messages about heart disease prevention, making his own death from a heart attack 17 years later feel like a cruel twist of fate. The episode dealt with the very real health crisis facing African American men, who statistically suffered from higher rates of heart disease than other demographic groups. Rasulala's character was portrayed as an earnest advocate trying to save lives by spreading information about heart health, making his advocacy work on the show seem prophetic in the most unfortunate way possible. The timing of both deaths created an additional layer of sadness for fans of Sanford and Son, as they lost 2 actors from the show's family within 48 hours, both to the same medical condition that Rasulala's character had warned about on screen. The coincidence was so striking that it became part of both actors' biographical information, with many obituaries noting the connection between Rasulala's advocacy role and his actual cause of death. This real-life irony transformed what had been a routine guest appearance on a popular sitcom into one of television's most haunting examples of life, imitating art in the most tragic way possible. Fact 12. A Broadway star hiding in plain sight. Before Thalmus Rasulala became known as the smooth criminal mastermind of Cool Breeze, he had already achieved success as a Broadway musical star, though audiences would never have known it because he performed under his birth name of Jack Crowder. In 1967, Crowder landed the role of Cornelius Hackle in the all-black production of Hello, Dolly, starring the legendary Pearl Bailey and jazz icon Cab Calloway. This wasn't just any Broadway show, but a groundbreaking production that opened on November 12, 1967, and became one of the most celebrated revivals in Broadway history. The Pearl Bailey production of Hello, Dolly was such a cultural phenomenon that RCA Victor recorded a complete cast album featuring the entire company, including Crowder's vocal performances in several songs. This album went on to become a bestseller, meaning that thousands of music fans owned recordings of the future Cool Breeze star singing on one of Broadway's most successful soundtracks, though they had no idea that Jack Crowder would later become Thalmus Rasulala. For his Broadway debut performance, Crowder even won a Theatre World Award, one of the most prestigious honors given to outstanding newcomers in New York theater. The contrast between Crowder's Broadway success and Rasulala's film career could hardly have been more dramatic. On stage, he was performing in lavish musical numbers and wearing elaborate period costumes as part of a company that was redefining American musical theater. Just a few years later, he was playing a diamond thief in a gritty urban crime film, using an entirely different name and persona. This transformation, from Broadway musical star to blaxploitation leading man, represents one of the most unusual career transitions in entertainment history, with very few people realizing that the sophisticated stage performer and the street-smart movie character were the same person. Fact 13. The all-black cast. all-white crew paradox. Cool Breeze created a strange contradiction that didn't go unnoticed by critics, as the film presented itself as an authentic black production while being controlled entirely by white filmmakers behind the scenes. New York Times critic Roger Greenspun pointed out this uncomfortable reality in his review, noting that the film's quality of blackness was actually somewhat strained because it only applied to much of the cast and most of the attitudes and virtually all the ad campaign, but none of the major technical credits, including Gene Corman as producer and Barry Pollock, who directed and wrote the screenplay. This observation highlighted a common problem in early 1970s blaxploitation cinema, where Hollywood studios wanted to capitalize on black audiences and the growing demand for films featuring African American characters, but weren't willing to give creative control to black filmmakers, writers, or producers. Cool Breeze was being marketed as an authentic urban black experience, with promotional materials emphasizing the all-black cast and the film's connection to African American culture and social issues. However, every major decision about how the story was told, how the characters were portrayed, and how the film looked and sounded was made by white men who had never lived the experiences they were depicting on screen. The contradiction became even more apparent when considering that the film dealt with themes of racial inequality and black pride, yet these messages were being filtered through the perspectives of filmmakers who couldn't speak from personal experience about the realities of being black in America. Greenspun's criticism suggested that this disconnect between the film's surface-level blackness and its actual creative control created an artificial quality that undermined the movie's authenticity. The result was a film that looked like it was made by and for the black community, but was actually crafted by white Hollywood professionals who were trying to capture something they could only observe from the outside. Fact 14. Solomon Burke's Preacher, Criminal Connection. The producers of Cool Breeze made an inspired choice when they selected R&B legend Solomon Burke to create the film's soundtrack, because Burke's own life perfectly mirrored one of the movie's most unusual characters. Just like the film's Reverend Roy Harris, who balanced his duties as a Christian minister with his skills as a professional safecracker, Solomon Burke lived a double life as both a genuine preacher and a celebrated performer in the often morally questionable world of popular music. This real-life contradiction made Burke the ideal musical voice for a movie that featured a man of God who used laser technology to commit crimes. Burke had been known since his youth as a wonder boy preacher who could captivate congregations from the pulpit, but his love for worldly pleasures and temporal success led him toward a music career that made all of life's temptations readily available. Throughout his rise to fame as the self-proclaimed king of rock and soul, Burke maintained his religious identity while also embracing the more secular aspects of entertainment, often appearing on stage wearing a crown and royal robes that reflected his dual nature as both spiritual leader and showman. The film's soundtrack perfectly captured this tension between sacred and profane worlds, with Burke's song Love Street and Fool's Road becoming a minor hit on both the soul charts and the Hot 100. The movie even included a scene that seemed designed to highlight this contradiction, showing three criminals awkwardly trying to conduct illegal business while sitting on church pews, surrounded by elders and children who were attempting to worship. Burke, who understood the constant struggle between spiritual calling and earthly desires, probably appreciated this kind of inner conflict more than most artists could have. His own experience navigating between the pulpit and the recording studio gave him unique insight into the moral complexity that Cool Breeze was trying to explore through its unusual preacher-criminal character. Fact 15. The Diamond Education Prison Prep. Unlike most movie criminals who learn their trade on the streets or from experienced mentors, Cool Breeze's protagonist, Sidney Lord Jones, developed his expertise in the most unlikely classroom imaginable: his prison cell at San Quentin. While serving his sentence, Jones didn't spend his time plotting with fellow inmates or learning criminal techniques from hardened convicts, but instead devoted himself to reading trade magazines about the diamond industry, studying the legitimate business like a graduate student preparing for his comprehensive exams. This academic approach to criminal education was highly unusual for blaxploitation films, which typically featured characters who gained their knowledge through street experience or family connections to the underworld. Jones's method was more like that of a business school student researching a new industry, except his ultimate goal was to rob it rather than join it legally. The film shows him methodically absorbing information about diamond grading, market values, distribution networks, and security procedures, building the foundation for what he believed would be the perfect heist. Jones's research-based criminal preparation reflected a more sophisticated type of lawbreaker than audiences usually saw in these kinds of movies. Rather than relying on instinct, violence, or insider connections, he approached his planned $3 million diamond theft like a corporate executive studying a potential acquisition. His prison cell essentially became a private library where he could focus on his studies without the distractions of street life, giving him the time and concentration needed to become an expert in an industry he had never actually worked in. This unusual origin story for Jones's criminal expertise made him a more intellectual character than typical blaxploitation protagonists, suggesting that his mind was his greatest weapon rather than his physical prowess or street connections. The film presented his magazine-based education as a legitimate form of preparation, treating his academic approach to crime as just another way of gaining the specialized knowledge needed for a complex professional undertaking.